I will say today's daf is Mem Gimel. We are beginning on Mem Beis Amud Beis 42b, and we left off, in the middle of the Mishnah. So about in the new parak, in the new Mishnah, about 2, 4, 6, 7 lines in. So the Gemara says, Mitzvahs lulav ketzad. So ultimately, again, how do you have a situation of lulav? Remember, again, the Mishnah said that sometimes the mitzvah of lulav is 6 days, sometimes it's 7 days. And the Gemara explained, when is it 7 days? When the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos. So that's the Gemara, that's the Mishnah is going to describe over here. A situation in which the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos. So what would happen? Mitzvah lulav ketzad Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Shechalios b'Shabbos. If the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, Molichin Asulavein LaHarabayis. People would bring their lulav and their esrog to the Beis Hamikdash, to Harabayis, before Yom Tov starts on Erev Shabbos. V'chazonim mekablen mehen v'sojonos agabi itztiva. And the chazonim, the attendants who would be working in the Beis Hamikdash. This was, we learned about these chazonim before. Rashi says, Shamoshim shahayu sham l'tzarchei tzibur. These were attendants who were there to help people. They were like the Beis Hamikdash docents. They were there to help people in the Beis Hamikdash. They would accept the lulav and esrogim, and then they would arrange them al gabi itztava. Itztava is a bench, so they would arrange them on benches. And the elders would place their lulavim in a particular chamber. Now, what would happen is the next morning people would come, and remember, on the first day of Yom Tov, you have to have your own lulav and esrog. So the problem, of course, becomes what happens if you don't end up getting your own. So now the Mishnah says something amazing. The Chazonim would teach the people to say, they would teach people to say that you should make a condition. Tomorrow when you come to get your lulav, if I get my own lulav, great. But if it turns out that I don't get my lulav, whoever in fact does receive my lulav should be a matana, should be a gift for that individual. Lamachar mashkim, in the next morning Shabbos, they would wake up. Ubain, they would come early to the Harabayis. V'chazon is zarkin osan lifnehem. But what would happen? In other words, you can't have a situation where everybody comes up one at a time to take their lulav and esrog. It would take years. So the Chazon, the Shamash, would literally just throw the lulavim into the crowd. V'hein mechatfin umakin ishes re'eu, and just inadvertently, as people are trying to go ahead and retrieve their lulav and esrog, what would happen? They would go ahead and mechatfin, makin. They would end up bumping into each other, hitting each other, clapping each other. Umakin ishes chavero, and they would end up going ahead and inadvertently hurting. Again, obviously there was no malicious intent. No one was trying to hurt each other. But lamaisa, when everybody's trying to retrieve their lulav and esrog, so they end up harming each other. Ukisharel Bezdin sheboli de sakana. When Bezdin saw that now this had become a matter of sakana, hiskinu sheyehe kol echad ve'echad no tavabesa. They instituted an interesting halacha, which is that when the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, take lulav and esrog at home. Don't bring it to the mikdash, because if you bring it to the mikdash, what's going to happen? We see chaos is going to happen. So go ahead and take lulav and esrog at home. Again, we'll define the parameters of this takana in just a little bit. To which the Gemara says, Amai, tiltul ba'amuhu b'litchi Shabbos. We'll say the Mishnah makes a very big deal when the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. That you need a whole takana, you could take it. What's the big deal? Remember again, the prohibition to go ahead and pick up lulav and esrog on Shabbos would be a potential of muktzah. Is muktzah. So if there's a mitzvah da'oraisa, a positive commandment to go ahead and take lulav and esrog, so of course that'll trump, of course that will overcome, that'll set aside any type of rabbinic prohibition. So what's the issue? Amarabba, so we'll say we've made mention of this many times. Ultimately, again, Amarabba, gezir shem yitlena biyado, v'yelech eitzel baki lilmo, top of Mem Gimel, v'yavirenu arba amos birshos harabim. This is what's called the Gzeir de Rabbah. Rabbah says, in reality, you're right. On a technical halachic level, the biblical obligation to take lulav and esrog the first day would definitely set aside any halachos of muktzah. Rabbah was concerned that there's a more general issue. What's the more general issue? A person is, Rashi says, maybe doesn't know how to do the nanuim, doesn't know how to shake the lulav, or maybe doesn't know the bracha. So a person's going to want to take their lulav to a chacham in order the chacham could instruct them. And this individual may inadvertently end up carrying the lulav dalid amis in rishos harabim, or from a rishos harabim to rishos hayochid, rishos hayochid to rishos harabim. In other words, a prohibited act of hotzah, of transference of an item from one domain to another. So this is where Rabbah comes along, and Rabbah says that halacha lemaisa, you can't take lulav and esrog on Shabbos out of a concern that you may come to carry it. V'hainu taima de shofar, v'hainu taima de Megillah. And this is the same reason why, if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't go ahead and blow shofar. Same idea. There's a concern that maybe a person will take the shofar and walk Dalit Amis in order to take the shofar to the Baal Tokea. Same thing with Megillah. If Purim falls out on Shabbos, we don't celebrate Purim on Shabbos, we push it to Sunday. Right? Ultimately, again, because we're concerned that someone may come to carry the Megillah to the Baal Koreh to read it on their behalf on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Yom Rishon Nami. If that's the case, then even when first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, should this also not be a concern? In other words, the Mishnah, remember, the Gemara is trying to understand over here as follows, that the Mishnah made it clear that when first day of Sukkot falls out on, when anything other than the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, so halacha l'maaseh we don't take lulav and esrog. Now the Gemara explains why, because Rabbah came along and said there's a concern that you may come to carry the lulav and esrog dalan amis in Rosh Hashanah. So asks the Gemara, if that's the case, even when the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, you shouldn't be able to go ahead and carry the lulav and esrog or you shouldn't take it. After all, shouldn't there be a concern of hotzah that you may come to transfer it? To which Gemara says, Yom Rishon Nami, Rishon Hatakinu Rabbanan Bebeso. To which the Gemara says, no, that's right. Remember, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said when the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, the rabbis instituted people to take lulav and esrog in their home. Now, interestingly enough, as much as the takana to take it at home was a response to the chaotic scene which unfolded in the Beis Hamikdash, the Gemara says that also happens to take care of another issue, which is if you instruct people to take it at home, by definition, there's no concern that one is going to come to carry it. To which the Gemara says, fine, hatinach achar takana, kodem takana ma'ikal meimar, that's fine. That's fine after the takana was made. What about before the takana? In other words, the Mishnah clearly indicates that there was a period of time where there wasn't this takana, which means that on Shabbos, people were able to bring the lulav and esrog to the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos, or they were able to utilize it on Shabbos. Is there not a concern that at the end of the day they may come to carry it? Ella rishon de'isei min haTorah bigvulin lo gazru b'Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, to which the Gemara answers that at the end of the day, because the first day is da'oraisa, therefore Chazal initially did not make any takana even outside of the Beis Hamikdash. So interestingly enough, what ends up happening here is as follows, that originally the lulav and esrog was taken on Shabbos, even ultimately again outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Then after these chaotic scenes unfolded inside of the Beis Hamikdash, the Chazanim throwing out the lulav and everybody trampling each other. So what happened? They were gozer, they decreed everybody should take the lulav inside their house on Shabbos. And then Rabbah came along and said, no, we don't take lulav and esrog at all on Shabbos. Why? Gezeira shema ya'avirenu dalet amas b'Rosh Hashanah. I have a concern that if we allow you to go and take lulav and esrog, you may come to go ahead and transport it dalet amas in Rosh Hashanah. Now Rashi points out over here something very interesting. Rashi says, Ela Rishon. Rashi says over here, he says, if you skip a little bit in Rashi, Rashi says over here, the gazu bei rabbanim mishum chumra de Shabbos va'apa mikdash vim tomar nimtzu beis din maslin lakar davar min haTorah. Rashi asks a very simple question. So Rabbah comes along and says, you shouldn't take the lulav and esrog on the first day of Sukkot when it falls on Shabbos. Why? Out of a concern that you may come to transport the lulav and esrog dalit amis in Rosh Hashanah to go to a chacham to show you what to do. You end up transgressing Shabbos, therefore no lulav and esrog. So doesn't that effectively mean that the rabbis are uprooting a biblical mitzvah? There's a biblical obligation to take lulav and esrog on the first day. So how could the rabbis make a decree to uproot a biblical obligation? To which Rashi explains, Beis din masnin lakar davar min haTorah b'shanin b'shev v'al tasa shayni. Quotes over the Gemara Maseches Yevamis that Chazal have the ability to essentially set aside the performance of a biblical obligation by telling you to be passive. In other words, Chazal don't have the ability to actively tell me to violate an Aveira, but if Chazal see that there's a communal need, they could tell me, be passive and don't do the mitzvah. So Rabbah understood there was a real concern over here that people are going to engage in an inadvertent act of carrying. So he said, don't take lulav and esrog. Aren't you actively uprooting a biblical mitzvah? No, I'm not actively uprooting anything. I'm telling people, shev yal tasa, be passive. Be passive. And ultimately, again, rabbinically encouraged passivity is permitted when that passivity serves to save the general populace from a more severe transgression. So here Rabbah would say, I'd rather tell you to be passive, not take lulav and esrog, rather than to tell you to take lulav and esrog and run the risk of a more severe transgression or of a severe transgression of hotzah. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, good. So the Gemara, let me finish reading it. So the Gemara says, what about now? So if that's the case, the way the Gemara seems to make it sound is that halacha l'maisa, the original takana was only on days that were not the first, only on Shabbos when it was not the first day Sukkos. So that's what the Gemara just said. Rishon di'isei min Torah, so the first day which is biblically obligated, bigvulin lo gazru. Chazal were initially not gozer, and therefore allowed you to take lulav and esrog. However, hanach delesnu min Torah, but the subsequent days of Sukkos, which are not biblically mandated to take lulav and esrog outside of the Beis HaMikdash, Chazal stepped in and said you should not take lulav and esrog. Ihachi. Ha'idna nami. If that's the case, why don't we say the same thing now? In other words, why don't we say, so now, remember, Rabbah made his statement. So now we live in the age of Rabbah. But why don't we practice in the same way? Why don't we say as follows, that halacha l'maisa, just like Chazal were originally not gozer, when the first day of Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, let's assume that still applies now. That if the first day of Sukkot falls on Shabbos, we do take lulav and esrog. Okay, we'll take it at home. But we do take lulav and esrog. Why ultimately, again, don't we take lulav and esrog now? Contemporarily, we don't take lulav and esrog the first day Yom Tov when it falls on Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, Ana lo yadina b'kviyad diarcha, because we are not proficient in the calendar. Right? We have a Succah ish, right? Remember again, in general we have a Succah and ours now today we don't, but historically they did have a doubt. Was the previous month 29 days, 30 days? Is today the first day of Yom Tov, second day of Yom Tov? So because we always have this halachic or date ambiguity, therefore again Chazal said, don't take lulav and esrog the first day of Yom Tov, even if it falls on Shabbos. The Gemara says, Inhu diyada b'kviyad diarcha litru. So if that's the case, the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. So remember again, the date ambiguity only applied to the diaspora. It never applied in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, they always had a solid understanding of time and of the calendar, because remember again, it was the Beis Din, the High Court, which would declare the new month. The only reason there was date ambiguity outside of Eretz Yisrael is because sometimes it would take the witnesses some time to get there in order to testify about the new moon. This is Maseches Rosh Hashanah. We'll get to the Mirat Shem B'Shat Mitzlachos. But in Eretz Yisrael, they never had date ambiguity. If that's the case, then at least in Eretz Yisrael, when the first day of Sukkot falls on Shabbos, they should take lulav and esrog. Fine, I accept that outside of Eretz Yisrael in the Galus we won't do it, but in Eretz Yisrael they should. To which the Gemara says, "Enachinami, you're right. That was in fact the initial practice. The Tani Chada b'Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Shechalios b'Shabbos Kol Ha'am Molichin Es U'Levein Laharabayis." Because the Gemara says as follows. Originally the Gemara said, the Mishnah said, that when the people, right, when Yom Tov Rishon, when the first day of Sukkot fell out on Shabbos, people would bring their lulav erev Shabbos to Harabayis. That's a reference to the Beis HaMikdash. Another Mishnah, B'Tanya Idach, which was again the Mishnah we had on Mem Aleph Amud Beis, LeBeis HaKnesses. Remember, we have two different Mishnahs. We have a Mishnah Mem Beis Amud Beis, which we just read today at the beginning of this parak, and then the Mishnah we had in Daf 2 days ago, where the Mishnah spoke about bringing the lulavim to shul on Erev Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, listen to this. The Mishnah we just read on Mem Beis Amud Beis, that's talking about bringing the lulav and esrog to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Mishnah on Mem Aleph Amud Beis, what is that referring to? That's referring to in Eretz Yisrael, they would bring their lulavim to shul on Erev Shabbos. So what do you see from here? You see from here that in Eretz Yisrael, where there was no date ambiguity, they would take lulav and esrog on the first day of Yom Tov, even when it fell out on Shabbos. Just the difference was, in order to avoid any potential hotzah, they would bring it to shul on Erev Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, Shmamina, see from this that indeed this was the case once upon a time. So this is fascinating because you see like an entire evolution of Gzeira. Once upon a time there was this distinction that ultimately, again, even after the Beis HaMikdash, there was this time, or even, right, there was this time where when the first day of Yom Tov fell out on Shabbos, in Eretz Yisrael, they would take lulav and esrog even outside of the Beis HaMikdash. In the diaspora, we never did. Why the difference? Sveka Diyoma. In the diaspora and Galus, there was a discussion or there was a doubt about what the date was. So you're not sure, is it the first day, is it the second day, or is it the first day, is it Erev Yom Tov? And therefore, again, they would not take it, no matter what the circumstances, on the first day of Yom Tov that fell out on Shabbos. But in Eretz Yisrael, where they were sure about the date, halach l'maisa, even outside the Beis HaMikdash, they would take a little bit of esrog on the first day of Yom Tov. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Shmamina kan bizman shebeis hamikdash kayum, kan bizman she'ein beis hamikdash kayum shmamina. So you see from here that halach l'maisa, not only did they take lulav and esrog on the first day of Yom Tov, which fell on Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash, but even after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, they would still continue to do so in Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael they knew definitively which was the first day. First day, there's a biblical mitzvah to go ahead and take lulav and esrog. They would do so even on Shabbos. In the diaspora, already they would not. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, how do we know that halacha l'maisa outside of the Beis HaMikdash, that there is a biblical obligation to take lulav and esrog on the first day? Right? The Gemara made that statement before, that not only is there a biblical obligation to take lulav and esrog inside of the Beis HaMikdash, but even outside of the Mikdash. Where do we know that from? To which the Gemara says, Minalan, the Sanya ulakachtem, because the pasuk says, and you shall take, shetehei lekicha biyad kol echad ve'echad, that teaches us that every person must take lulav and esrog. Lachem, when it says lachem, mishel lachem, it means the lulav and esrog has to belong to you. Lahotzias hashal v'esagazel, to exclude a borrowed lulav or a stolen lulav. Bayom, what does bayom teach me? It's just darshaning the pasuk. Afilu b'Shabbos. Bayom teaches me that I even take lulav and esrog even on Shabbos. Rishon, afilu bigvulin. And Rishon means that what? That on the first day of Yom Tov, if the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, that halacha l'maisa, you take lulav and esrog even outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Harishon, the first, because that's the definitive article, the hay. Teaches us, however, that halacha l'maisa, it is only when the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, that the first day of Yom Tov is docha Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, I'm sorry. Good. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, Bayom Afilu b'Shabbos, Michdi Tiltal Ba'amahu. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, why do I need a drasha? The Gemara is reverting back to its original question. The Gemara says, at the end of the day, why do I need a pasuk to teach me that you could take a little bit of an esrog on Shabbos? After all, isn't the only issue involved over here a potential muktzah one, and muktzah's dirabanan? So why would I need a drasha to teach you that I could fulfill a biblical obligation in the face of a rabbinic prohibition on muktzah? Isn't that obvious? To which the Gemara says, it's dirchra lemishrei tiltul. Ultimately, again, Halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says, do I need a pasuk to permit the movement of muktzah? Rashi says the prohibition of muktzah wasn't even advanced yet. So what do I need the pasuk for? Amar Rava, lo nitzcha l'machshirei lulav. This is fascinating. Rava says, no. When it says bayom, and bayom permits you to take lulav and esrog even on Shabbos, what it's allowing you to do is as following. Machshir lulav, the preparatory acts to allow one to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and esrog. What does this mean? Valiba dahai tana, in accordance with the following tana. Tisanyo lulav v'chol machshirav dochen es hashavz Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds, will say that not only are you permitted to go ahead and take lulav and esrog on Shabbos, but halacha l'maisa, the machshirei mitzvah, the preparatory acts. For example, let's say you forgot to cut off your lulav from the palm tree. You forgot to detach your esrog from the citron tree. Rabbi Eliezer says that halacha l'maisa, when we say bayom afilu b'Shabbos, it means everything involved to allow you to perform the mitzvah of lulav and esrog is permitted, even to cut it off the tree. My time with Rabbi Eliezer. What's Rabbi Eliezer's logic? Avarkra bayom, because the mitzvah says bayom afilu b'Shabbos. Anything you need to do in order to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, even machshirei mitzvah, preparatory acts which will allow you to perform the mitzvah, will be permitted on Shabbos. V'Rabbanan, hai bayom ayavdili. What do the Rabbanan do with the word bayom? Mi boile bayom velo balayla. They use that to teach you the halacha that lulav could only be taken by day and not at night. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer, bayom v'lo balayla minale. Where does Rabbi Eliezer know that you can only take lulav and esrog by day and not at night? Nafgale miseifa dikra. He learns that from the end of the pasuk. What's the end of the pasuk? Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yomim. The pasuk says, you shall rejoice before Hashem your God for 7 days. Yomim v'lo leilos. Days and not nights. Days and not nights. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, since it says by the taking of the lulav and esrog, usmachtem lifnei Hashem shivas yomim, lulav and esrog only applies by day, not at night. V'Rabbanon, why don't the Rabbanon learn it out from here? Ime hasam hava mina leilif yomim yomim Succah. Because if you're going to learn it out from yomim, I might have thought that maybe I learned it out of Gzera Shavav Yomim Yomim from Succah. Malahalon Yomim Afilu Leilos. By Succah it says Yomim, but Yomim means what? Days and night. The mitzvah of Succah is by day and by night. Afkan Nami Yomim Vafilu Leilos. So maybe when it says Yomim by Lulav, it also means day and night, just like Yomim by Succah. Besukkah Gufam. By the way, how do you know that Succah, that Yomim by Succah means day and night? The Tan Rabbanon. Basukkos Teishu Shivas Yomim. The pasuk says you shall do on the Succah 7 days. Yomim va'afilu leilos. So shivas yomim. Yomim means days and nights. Ata omer yomim afilu leilos. Yom v'lo leilos. Maybe you'll say no. Maybe shivas yomim means you only have to live in the sukkah by day, but not at night. So the Gemara says v'dinhu. I'll tell you it's kavachomer. Nemar kan yomim v'nemar b'lulav yomim. It says over here by sukkah yomim, and it says by lulav yomim. Malahalon yomim v'lo leilos. Afkan yomim v'lo leilos. I'll advance a cogent argument. It says yomim by lulav and esrog, and it says yomim by sukkah. Just like yomim by lulav and esrog only means by day, so too yomim by sukkah also only means by day. Okay, lechal derech zu. Or I can advance a different argument. Nemar kan yomim. It says over here yomim by sukkah. V'nemar b'miluim yomim, and it says by miluim. So I will say, so again, by miluim, remember again, is the inauguration of the Mishkan. So remember again, the Kohanim sat by the entranceway of the Mishkan, did the abode by the entranceway for 8 straight days. B'miluim, so the Gemara says, Malahan yomim v'lo leilos, just like by the miluim, the Kohanim were not permitted to leave the entranceway of the Ohel Moed, of the Mishkan, day and night. Afkan yomim v'afilu leilos. So too over here, ultimately it means yomim and leilos. Sukkah also means yomim v'leilos. So the Gemara says, Nira lemi doma. So the Gemara says, let's see, to what should it best be compared? So done in davar shemitzvasa chalem davar shemitzvasa kolayom, va'ayochiach davar shemitzvasa sha'achos. I could say better to compare sukkah to miluim, because sukkah and miluim both have a mitzvah the whole day. Masha'en kain, lulav and esrog, there's only a mitzvah part of the day. Right? Only mitzvah part of the day. So the Gemara says, and don't go ahead and try to, in other words, we'll say the shaila is, you have 2 things you could compare sukkah to. You could compare sukkah to lulav and esrog and say, just like lulav and esrog only applies by day, doesn't apply by night, so the sukkah only applies by day and not by night. Or you could compare sukkah to the milum, to the inauguration, because everything has lashon of yomim. Just like by the miluim, the inauguration process was by day and by night, so too sukkah is by day and by night. So the Gemara says, so which one should you compare sukkah to? Should you compare sukkah to lulav and esrog or to miluim? To which the Gemara says, well, better to compare sukkah to miluim, which apply day and night, and not to lulav, which only applied not even for a whole day. You don't have a mitzvah to take lulav the whole day. You have a mitzvah to take lulav sha'achos at one point in time during the day. Okay, lechal derech zu. Or you could advance a counter argument. Davar shemit done in davar shemitzvaso ledoros mi davar shemitzvas ledoros. Or better yet, I would say, let's learn out sukkah from lulav, because the common denominator between sukkah and lulav is they both apply for all future generations. Whereas miluim, right, the halachos of the inauguration only apply when? For that particular time. There was no other halacha, no other time where the halachos of the inauguration applied. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, Mem Gimel Amud Beis, Talmud Lomar, Teishvu ligzera shava. The pasuk says Teishvu, right? Ne'amar kan Teishvu. It says by sukkahs Teishvu shivas yom. It says by sukkah you should dwell. The ne'amar b'miluin Teishvu, and it says by the miluin, by the inauguration Teishvu as well. Malahalon yamim va'afilu leilos. Just like by the miluim, we know that it means day and night. Afkan yomim vafilu leilos. So too over here, it also means yomim as well as leilos. It means also day as well as night. So again, so kind of backing up a little bit, so halacha l'maisa, the Gemara indicates to us that that halacha l'maisa, that Sukkah is learned out from Miluim, that just like Miluim was by day and by night, so too Sukkah ultimately again is by day and by night, and Sukkah is not learned out from the halachos of lulav, because lulav only applies sha'achas. Now, I just want to share with you something interesting. The Rambam, So the Rambam, advantage of doing the daf like this. So the Rambam paskins, interesting halacha over here. So this is in Perek Zayin halacha Yud Gimel in Hilchos Lulav. Let's see if I could do this quickly. We'll do it now. Otherwise, Emir Hashem. So Perek Zayin halacha Gimel. So just listen to this. Rambam writes as follows. Rambam says, Halacha Yud Gimel, excuse me. Perek Zayin Halacha Yud Gimel. Rambam writes as follows. Mitzvahs, this is Perek Zayin Halacha Yud Gimel Hilchos Lulav. Mitzvahs Lulav lihinata b'yom rishon shechag bilvad b'chol makom u'b'chol zman v'afilu b'Shabbos. So here the Rambam is quoting the pure halacha. The pure halacha is that on the first day of Yom Tiv, there is a mitzvah to take lulav and esrog, and that mitzvah applies b'chol makom, anywhere you are, Beis HaMikdash, Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz, u'b'chol zman, meaning when the Beis HaMikdash stands, when the Beis HaMikdash doesn't stand, afilu b'Shabbos. Right? So there's a mitzvah da'oraisa to take lulav on day one, wherever you live and whenever you live. Ubemikdash levado, notlin also b'chol yom v'yom b'shivas me'achag, sh'nei asmat le'Hashem Elokechem. But again, the halacha is, in the Beis HaMikdash, they would take it all 7 days. Okay? The Rambam then goes on to say, Chal yom HaShabbos lios b'sochi me'achag, Eino nitl b'Shabbos gezerah shemen elichana b'yado arba'am tzurabim ki Moshe gazu b'shofar. However, again, if Shabbos falls out on any of the other days of Sukkot, then we won't take the lulav and esrog, gzera derabba, out of a concern that you may come to go ahead and carry the lulav and esrog dalet amis and rosh hashanah. Okay, so that's how the Rambam paskins. The mitzvah da'oraisa of Yom Rishon lulav and esrog applies anywhere, everywhere, and at any time. Right? So ultimately, again, I'm just going to read to this Rambam. It's going to take you just a few moments. So again, the Rambam says, but I don't understand, Rabba, if you're concerned that on Shabbos someone's going to end up carrying the lulav dalet amis, so why wouldn't that concern exist on the first day also, even when the first day falls out on Shabbos? Shouldn't you say that any time Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, you don't take lulav and esrog even on the first day? To which the Rambam says, because halacha l'maisa, the first day is doraisa. The first day is doraisa. The first day is separate and distinct from the subsequent days. Fine. The Rambam then goes on to say, Mishecharav Beis HaMikdash hiskinu she'lulav nita b'chol makom b'chol shivas me'achag zercha l'mikdash. Now the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and remember again, as we saw in yesterday's daf, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that we take the lulav all 7 days outside of the Mikdash as well. Zecher l'mikdash. V'chal yom v'yom mevarech alav asher k'shom mitzvah b'tzivan an l'tilas ulu meishem mitzvah d'rei sofrim. V'takana zum kala takanas good. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. Now we take lulav and esrog all 7 days zecher l'mikdash. So listen to this. Bizman shebeis HaMikdash kayom. This is in the halacha tes zayin. Hayalulav nital b'yom harishon shechalios b'Shabbos. V'chein b'shar makomos sheyadu bevadai sheyom zehu yom chag b'Eretz Yisrael. Aval makomos arachokim. So now the Rambam is reverting back a little bit. So when the Beis HaMikdash stood, so remember again, lulav was taken everywhere first day. Everywhere first day. In the Mikdash, outside of the Mikdash, anywhere where you knew for sure it was the first day of Yom Tiv, you took the lulav. Here we go. Mishechara Beis HaMikdash asra chamli ta'as lulav b'Shabbos yom harishon va'afilu b'nei Eretz Yisrael shekichu es hachodesh mipnei b'nei hagvulin harachokin sheni yodin notlin she'ein yodin b'kiviyas hachodesh kedei shu'ad davar shavin hakol shavin b'davar zeh v'lo ye'elu notlin b'Shabbos ve'elu ein notlin. So this is absolutely incredible. So the Rambam says when the Beis Hamikdash was, so just so you follow the progression is very important. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, lulav was taken all 7 days in the Mikdash, only 1 day outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Which day? The first day, because that's D'oraisa. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, Sahalacha Lamaisa, everyone took it on Shabbos, right? Everyone took it on Shabbos. As long as you knew for sure that it was the first day Yom Tov, you had no date ambiguity, everyone took it on Shabbos. That's only the first day. If, however, again, any of the other days of Yom Tov fell out on Shabbos, they would not take lulav and esrog, again, out of the concern that you would come to go ahead and carry it dalet amos. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that everyone takes the lulav and esrog for 7 days, zecher l'mikdash. Which is what we do to this very day. The Rambam then says something fascinating happened. After the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, no one takes lulav on the first day when it falls out on Shabbos. Or no one takes lulav and esrog ever on Shabbos. Whether it's the first day Yom Tov, the second day Yom Tov, the seventh day Yom Tov, doesn't make any difference. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, no one takes lulav and esrog on Shabbos. And the reasoning that Rambam says is amazing. The Rambam says, because once the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, Jewish communities are scattered. And what's going to happen? Some know the right date, some don't know the right date, right? This community has date ambiguity. This community doesn't have date ambiguity. So what's going to happen? It says the Rambam. Some are going to be doing like this, some are going to be doing like that, and that's not good. Therefore, the Rambam says, he says, Kedeshu hakol shavin b'davar zeh. It was important that everyone have uniform practice. V'lo elu notlin b'Shabbos ve'ein elu notlin. We don't want some taking on Shabbos, some not taking on Shabbos, which is why, again, this is what we understand. Contemporarily, this is what we do. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. No one takes lulav and esrog on Shabbos. Whether you live in Eretz Yisrael, whether you live in the diaspora, whether you know the real calendar, you don't know the real calendar, you have date ambiguity, you don't have date ambiguity, everyone does the same thing. Why, says the Rambam? In order that we not have differentiated practice. Shi'akol shavin. Let everyone be the same. So it's interesting to notice as follows. And then we'll have to go on. There's so much to say about this. The Rambam seems to be so concerned with everybody doing the same thing. Be it, if you think about it, even when the Beis Hamikdash stood, people weren't doing the same thing, right? In the Mikdash, they were taking the lulav all 7 days. Outside of the Beis Hamikdash, only 1 day, right? And already, again, even in times of the Beis Hamikdash, if you lived in a place where there was date ambiguity, you wouldn't take it day 1 that fell out on Shabbos because you weren't sure, is it day 1 or is it day not? So it's not like you had uniformity of practice when the Beis Hamikdash stood either. But perhaps it's such an incredible Musar Haskell. You see, also when we think about what was the power of the Beis Hamikdash, right? What is it that's so special about a Beis Hamikdash? What is it? It's a beautiful building. Baruch Hashem, Klal Yisrael has no shortage of beautiful buildings. We could build beautiful buildings from here until tomorrow. The power of the Beis Hamikdash was that it was a koach hama'achid. It was a glue. It was a unifying force. I've said this many times. There was only one Beis Hamikdash, right? There wasn't a yeshivish Beis Hamikdash and a modern Orthodox Beis Hamikdash. There wasn't a Hasidish Beis Hamikdash and a Litvish Beis Hamikdash. Not an Ashkenazic one, not a Sephardic one. There wasn't Hashkama. There wasn't late. There wasn't young couples. There wasn't the Sachari. There wasn't this. There was one Beis Hamikdash. And that was the power of the Beis Hamikdash. There was one address for all of Klal Yisrael, one thing that held us together, one structure, one address where we came to communicate, commune, and to become together, to be one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the power of the Beis Hamikdash. Do you know what's so traumatic about the Churban? It's not the loss of a building. Buildings come down and they could go up just as easily. That's not what we mourn. We mourn the loss of that national glue. We mourn the loss of that national glue. And so the Rambam's saying that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and others, the rabbis of that time understood, with no Beis Hamikdash, with no glue to hold us together, we have to try to find other ways to create that koach hama'achid, to create that power of togetherness, to create that glue, to create that bond that holds us together. And therefore, again, Chazal said, we can't have some communities taking on Shabbos and others not taking on Shabbos. Kedei shihu hakol shavin is Lashon HaRambam. Chazal understood we have to try to find common ground. In the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, we have to do our part to go ahead and create achdus within the ranks of Klal Yisrael. When we mourn the Beis Hamikdash, what we mourn is the lack of a unifying presence. We mourn the lack of a koach hama'ached. And so our avoda in the absence of the Beis Hamikdash is to create that achdus in as many ways as we can, including something amazing. If you can build achdus by giving up the mitzvah of lulav on the first day of Yom Tiv, we'll do it. Isn't that incredible? We'd sooner give up a mitzvah da'oraisa on the first day of Sukkot than create a fractured and splintered people. Think about the things we argue about. Think about the things we disagree about. Think about all of the peyrod and all of the machlokes that we create over things that are not really all that important. And here Chazal, here the Rambam, Perek Zayin, Halacha Yud Zayin in Hilchos Lulav says that Chazal said, you know what, better to give up the mitzvah of Lulav on Yom Rishon in order not to create a peyrud, in order not to create the separation of Klal Yisrael. Better to give up a mitzvah da'oraisa of lulav and esrog and keep Klal Yisrael unified, keep Klal Yisrael together, keep Klal Yisrael on the same front. Better to give up that mitzvah. If Chazal are ready to give up a mitzvah da'oraisa of lulav and esrog for the achdus of Klal Yisrael, then we have to be ready sometimes to give up our pettiness, our agendas, sometimes even our ideologies and our hashkafas, which may or may not be correct, in order to create a sense of achdus and Klal Yisrael. You can't yield on everything. You can't give in on everything. You can't give up on everything. And the truth is, even achdus has, unfortunately, its limitations. But lamaisi, see, if Chazal are ready to sacrifice a mitzvah da'oraisa, then we must be willing to give of ourselves to create achdus and Klal Yisrael as well. Incredible. But let's go weiter. Then Gemara goes on and Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis and says as follows. Arava b'shiva. Let's at least begin this sugya today. Arava b'shiva. So the Gemara says Arava b'shiva cases. Remember again, the Mishnah said that the mitzvah of Arava. Now, interestingly enough, we'll see in tomorrow's Daf. We do not, tomorrow and the next day, we do not yet know exactly what this mitzvah of Arava is. What mitzvah of Arava are you referring to? It's certainly not referring to the mitzvah of Arava, the Arava and the Lulav. It's talking about some kind of independent mitzvah of Arava. So what is this? Again, we'll see. Right now, what we know in the Mishnah is sometimes the mitzvah of Arava applies for 6 days, sometimes it applies for 7 days. When does it apply on 7 days? For 7 days? When the 7th day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, you still take the Arava even on Shabbos. But again, if Shabbos were to fall out on any other day of Sukkot, you would not take the Arava on that day. So the Gemara says, Arava b'shvi, my time of Dachya Shabbos. Why does the mitzvah of Arava set aside the halachos of Shabbos? Why is it Docha Shabbos? Now I will say again, I just want to point out, we don't even know yet exactly what this mitzvah of Arava is, but we know that it's Docha Shabbos if the Shabbos falls out on the 7th day of Sukkot. Or I should say the 7th day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. So what's the reason? Rabbi Yochanan kadei lefarsam Hashem in Torah, in order to publicize the fact that the mitzvah of Arava is a biblical mitzvah. Now we're going to discuss this, that the mitzvah of Arava is not written in the Torah. The mitzvah of Arava is a halacha leMoshe miSinai. So there was a big machlokas about this between the Rabbanim and the Tzedukim. The Tzedukim felt there's no such thing as a mitzvah of Arava because they couldn't find it written anywhere in the Torah. So in order to publicize the fact that the mitzvah of Arava is a mitzvah da'oraisa, they would do it even on Shabbos. Ihachi lulav nami litchi kedei lefarsam Moshe in Torah. If that's the case, why do you say the same thing by lulav? Right? Lulav should also set aside. Ihachi lulav nami litchi kedei lefarsam Moshe in Torah. Why not go ahead and say the same thing by lulav? Rashi says lulav nami nitchu b'shar yamim b'mikdash kedei lefarsam Moshe in Torah. Now, what the Gemara is asking is like this: lulav in the mikdash is da'oraisa all 7 days. Yet the Mishnah said lulav is only docha Shabbos on if the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. But why don't you say, in order to highlight the fact that the mitzvah of lulav is da'oraisa in the Beis Hamikdash all 7 days, then lulav in the Mikdash should set aside Shabbos no matter what day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. To which the Gemara says lulav gezira mishum derabba. No, because lulav we have the other issue, the gezira derabba, that a person may come to carry the lulav dalat amis in Rosh Hashanah. Ihachi Arava nami nigzar. So why do we say something about Arava? Why do we allow you to take the Arava on the 7th day of Sukkot when it falls out on Shabbos? Aren't we concerned that maybe one will come to carry the Arava dalat amis in Rosh Hashanah? To which the Gemara says, listen to this: Arava Shluchei Beis Din Maisila Lulav Lakal Maser. We're going to see that the mitzvah of Arava was not carried out by the general populace. It was carried out on behalf of Klal Yisrael in the Beis Hamikdash. And who did it? Representatives of the Beis Din. So it was given over, the mitzvah was given over to meticulous people. When it's given over to meticulous people, we could assume they're not going to accidentally transgress Shabbos. Lulav is a mitzvah upon every individual. So because it applies to every individual, one has to be concerned that in the course of performing the mitzvah, one may come to inadvertently violate Shabbos. If that's the case, then why is Arava only Docha Shabbos on the 7th day of Sukkot that falls on Shabbos? Why don't we say that the Arava service is Docha Shabbos any day of the Yom Tov that falls on Shabbos? Asi lifakfuke belulav. This is very interesting because one may come to go ahead and then begin to treat the mitzvah of lulav in a more disparaging or light fashion. In other words, if I see that Arava is Docha Shabbos any day of Yom Tov, versus Lulav is only Docha Shabbos on when the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, leads me to the logical conclusion that Arava is more important than Lulav. Well, if Arava is more important than Lulav, that may lead people to go ahead and take shortcuts with lulav. Very interesting. It's actually interesting, kind of like how the human psyche works, is that, we create levels of importance. So the more important something is, the less prone I am to take shortcuts with it. The less important something is, the more prone I am to take shortcuts with it, or just treating it with less regard. It's just the way we work. So, and the way we kind of create those constructs is very interesting. So the Gemara was concerned over here that if every day of Arava is Docha Shabbos, people are going to say, Arava is more important than Lulav. You'll say, so I'll let them say that, because if Arava is more important than Lulav, that means Lulav is less important. If Lulav is less important, then I can take shortcuts. Which tells you why you have to have a proper hierarchy in life to make sure I really know what's important, what's less important, because human nature is such, you will always take shortcuts with the things that you deem to be less important. So make sure you have the right hierarchy of importance in life. So the Gemara says, "V'litri b'yom tov rishon." So why don't we just equate Arava and Lulav and say, just like Lulav is Docha Shabbos on the first day of Yom Tov, so to Arava is Docha Shabbos on the first day of Yom Tov as well. To which the Gemara says, Lo mucha milsa, because then it's not going to be apparent that it's Arava that's Docha Shabbos. Rather, what will people say? Amri, Lulav udikadachi. They'll say ultimately, again, the only reason you're allowed to do the Arava service is because Arava is part of Lulav. And it was really Lulav that was Docha Shabbos, not Arava. But Chazal wanted people to see that the Arava service itself is Docha Shabbos. To which the Gemara said, "V'litri bechad mehanach." So why do you say that it's the 7th day of Arava that's Docha Shabbos? Let it be the 2nd day of Sukkot that's Docha Shabbos for the Arava. So the first day of Sukkot ultimately again will be Docha Shabbos. You could be Docha Shabbos for Lulav, and the 2nd day of Sukkot you could be Docha Shabbos for Arava. To which the Gemara says, "Kevan the kamafkis lemi rishon ukma shvi." Because essentially, once you are taking the Arava out from the first day, in other words, once you're going to say that it's not the first day, it's Docha Shabbos, it makes sense to put it on the other end, right? To make it just discernible and noticeable. So Lulav is Docha Shabbos on day 1, Arava is Docha Shabbos on day 7. Ihochi ha'idna nami litchi. If that's the case, so presently, why don't we say that the Arava service should also be Docha Shabbos? Now again, the Gemara is presupposing that there would be an Arava service now also, to which the Gemara says, because we're going to discuss, again, we'll discuss, just to show you this, we do the Arava service. We're going to discuss, we do it on Hoshana Rabbah. On our Hoshana Rabbah, day number 7 of Sukkot. We'll discuss in the Gemara. So why don't we say ultimately again that the same way that when the Mikdash stood, if the 7th day of Sukkot fell out on Shabbos, you'd be Docha Shabbos for the Arava service. So say so too now, even in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, on day number 7, if it's Shabbos, you could take the Arava. To which the Gemara says, Analo Yadina B'Kviyah Diyarcha. So the Gemara says, that's because we don't do it today because we're unsure about the calendar, right? We have this calendrical or this date ambiguity. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if that's your issue, Nami Litchi, if that's the case, to which the Gemara says, I'm sorry, he said, Inhu, if that's the case, fine. So that works for people who have date ambiguity, but for people who don't have date ambiguity, so the Arava service should be Docha Shabbos when it falls out on the 7th day of Sukkot, even today. To which the Gemara says, Ki asa bar hedya amar lo ikla. When bar hedya came along, he said that halach l'maaseh never comes out like that. He says the way we have the calendar arranged is that the seventh day of Sukkot never falls out on Shabbos. Ravin and all those others all the others who came from Bavel or who went back to Bavel said it does happen that way. The calendar is set up that way. Velo dachi, and even though it could happen that ultimately again the seventh day of Sukkot can fall out on Shabbos, it's not docha Shabbos for Rava contemporarily outside of the Beis Hamikdash, or I should say in the aftermath structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Amrav Yosef man leimalon da'arava benetila. So we'll say so. Therefore, what the Gemara is asking over is as follows. Here's what we have. We know that just like Lulav is Docha Shabbos, when it's the first day of Sukkot that falls out on Shabbos, Arava is Docha Shabbos, ultimately again when the seventh day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. And the reason Chazal ultimately again did this was Kedei Lefarsamat, to highlight the fact that the Arava service, whatever it is, the Arava service is a biblical obligation, is a mitzvah da'oraisa. We'll see where, we'll see what, we'll get to that. The Gemara then deals with, okay, what about now? What about now? So there's a whole discussion. So again, obviously where there's date ambiguity, you're not going to allow the seventh day to be Docha Shabbos for Arava purposes, because you don't have the 7 days or the seventh day. What if you don't have any date ambiguity? So then there's a calendrical machlokes. Is the calendar set up in a way where the seventh day of Sukkot could ever fall out on Shabbos? That's a machlokes. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Now this whole discussion presupposes that the mitzvah of Arava is that you take the Arava. So that's the whole discussion. Can you take the Arava on the seventh day? Or I should say, the Mishnah said you do take the Arava on the seventh day of Sukkot, even though it's Shabbos. Who says the mitzvah is to take the Arava? Dilma bizikifa. Maybe the only mitzvah of Arava, and we'll discuss this in a minute, maybe the only mitzvah of Arava is to literally take it and lean it against the Mizbeach. In other words, maybe that's the mitzvah. Who says the mitzvah is to take the Arava? Says Abaye. Abaye says, raise the kasha. What's the kasha? So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, Eisvei, and we'll say, and again, obviously, if also that's the case, that the mitzvah of Arava is to rest it against the Mizbeach, well, of course what that means is, if there's no Mizbeach, there's no mitzvah of Arava. Right, that Rashi points this out. So obviously, again, that would mean contemporarily there is no such concept of the mitzvah of Arava being Docha Shabbos, even on day number 7. Seisve Abaye Lulav va'Arava Shisha v'Shiva. Remember again, the Mishnah said that sometimes the mitzvah of Lulav and Arava could apply for 6 days or 7 days. My love kilulav. Now it's interesting to note that the Mishnah groups Arava together with Lulav. Is it not to teach us the following? Ma Lulav binetila, af Arava binetila. Just like Lulav ultimately again is taken, so to Arava is taken as well. In other words, the Tila means you pick it up and you take it. So just like the Lulav is picked up and taken, so to Arava is picked up and taken. Maybe not. Maybe not. Midei area, hakidisa v'hakidisa. Maybe not. In other words, just because they're mentioned together doesn't automatically mean that they share the same qualification, same characteristic of Natila. Maybe Lulav has Natila, it's taken, and Arava is just Zakifa. You lean it against the Mizbeach. Esvei Abaye Sabai raises a kasha. Bechol yom makifin es hamizbeach pamachos. Also, we're going to see this. This is in Friday's daf in Mirtash. Shabbos's daf. We'll see this. So the Gemara says, Bechol yom makifin es hamizbeach pamachos. Every day, meaning every day of Sukkot, they would circle the Mizbeach with the Arava once. V'osayom sheva, I should say they would circle the Mizbeach once. V'osayom, that day, again we'll discuss which day that was, sheva pamim, ultimately again 7 days. Now what are they circling with? My love ba'arava, they're not circling with the Arava, which shows you that again the Arava is taken, not just simply leaned against the Mizbeach. To which Gemara says, lo, b'lulav, maybe not. No, maybe it means they would circle the Mizbeach holding their lulav and esrog. But maybe once again Arava was just simply placed against the Mizbeach. V'am Rav Nachman Rav Baravua ba'arava. Hi, but Rav Nachman said Rav Baravua. No, they took the Arava, they circled with the Arava. Amrlei hu amrlecha ba'arava va'ana amina balulav. So it's machlokes. Interesting machlokes. We know that they circled the Mizbeach once every day, and on the 7th day they circled 7 times. 7 days circled 7 times. There's a machlokes what they circled with. One opinion says they circled with the Arava. Other opinion says that they circled with the lulav and esrog. So obviously, according to the opinion who says that they circle with the Arava, that means the Arava is benetila. You take the Arava, you don't just lean it against the Mizbeach. Itmar. Shabbos said the Gemara now discusses this as a machlokes. Itmar, Rabbi Elazar Omer Belulav, Rav Shua Bar Nasan Omer Rabbi Chanina Ba'arava. So we'll say this is the machlokes. What did they circle the mizbeach with? One opinion says a lulav, another opinion says an arava. V'chin Omer Rav Nachman Omer Baravua Ba'arava. Another opinion arava. Omer Le Rava, the Rabbi Yitzchak Brei Rabbi Bar Chana Bar Uriah. So Rava said to Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Bar Chana Bar Uriah. Bar Uriah means son of the light, which is the way they used to refer to Talmidei Chachamim. Son of the light, Bar Uriah. I'm going to tell you something beautiful that your father used to say. What did your father say? When the Mishnah said, and we'll see this Mishnah, when the Mishnah said that they would circle them every day, they would circle the mizbeach once, but on that day, the seventh day of Yom Tov, they would circle 7 times. Your father said over in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Belulav. Ultimately, again, with the lulav. What did they circle with? The lulav. So, said there seems to be another raya to the fact that when they would circle the mizbeach, they would circle with the lulav. So we'll stop over here for today. But here's what we know. We know that halacha l'maisa the mitzvah take arava all 7 days. We know that the Mishnah tells us that only the 7th day of arava was docha Shabbos. Why? Again, it was docha Shabbos k'dei lefarsama, to show that it was a biblical obligation to go ahead and take arava. From where do we know that it was a biblical obligation to take arava? It's a halacha l'Moshe misinai. What we now see is as follows. We now begin to see Beis Hamikdash practice. What was Beis Hamikdash practice? Every day of Yom Tov, they would circle the mizbeach once. On the 7th day of Yom Tov, they would circle the mizbeach 7 times. What would they circle with? This is a machlokes. One opinion says lulav and esrog, the other opinion says ba'arava, with the aravas, and ultimately we'll resolve that machlokes and understand the arava practice in tomorrow's daf. Shkach Bosai, wishing everyone a wonderful day.